PDF version, unfortunately. So yeah, my name's Marek, and I'm a one-person music software company, which means I have to do all the programming and all the design. So these sorts of prototyping techniques I'm going to show you have really helped me get my stuff out of the door really quickly. The last project I did was this thing called Koala, which is like, I guess like a sampling workstation for iOS, and I think it took about 3 months to design and develop by me, and it got to #1 in I think like 28 different countries as a paid music app in the App Store. So I also worked as a prototyper software developer at Apple, and I've seen basically they use prototyping pretty much for every single product they make. It's like very important to do prototyping. So what I'm trying to say is that it's really important no matter what scale you're operating at. It's something that can really help. So prototyping, I'm going to show you what it is, why it's good, and how to do it. I haven't got my my notes. Oh my god, this is a video about this was supposed to be a video that shows you a problem that you would have in a product, like a very hypothetical product that has a big problem with it, that if you imagine the knob turning, so you want to put some distortion on a bass or something like that. So you open your hypothetical plugin and you try to turn up the gain because you just want lots of distortion, and it turns out you need to swipe up like 4 times. It moves really slowly because the developer thought it would be really nice to have a really sensitive control, but maybe it turns out no one really likes that. They just want to turn it all the way up. So it's like a user frustration that could have been prevented with 1 line of code. Here's another example of, let's say you open the synthesizer and you want to change the envelope of the sound, so you click directly on the envelope and you try moving it and nothing happens. You're expecting it to work like, Operator in Ableton or something like that, but the developer was actually intending you to use these knobs, not that. So they kind of like mismanaged your expectations. Like you're expecting it to do something, but it can't do it. Here's a third example, Mega Synth. It's like a synth you can do anything with. And all you want to do is change the cutoff of the filter, and it takes you about 30 seconds to find it. It's down here. And basically, by the time you've found it, you've kind of lost your music flow and you don't know where you are, and you can't even remember why you wanted the cutoff. So this is like really frustrating. And for the developer to fix this problem, they basically have to redesign the interface, to make it more navigable, and then like reprogram it, and that's just going to take absolutely ages. So prototyping is trying to avoid these sorts of situations by making small prototypes or mock-ups of your app in certain situations, so you can test these things out before you actually write the code. So hardware prototyping is quite like an established art, I would say. Like I guess it's where this sort of thinking comes from. Also, industrial design is a big one. We think it's this sort of process of making something and like trying it out, and then feeding back, and then putting into your next prototype the ideas that you've got from making the previous one, and trying to iterate as many times as possible. And it turns out it works really well in software because you don't actually have to make anything. You can just draw pictures or write code rather than actually having to burn your fingers with a soldering iron. So it generally follows this process of you create your prototype, and then you test your prototype. Maybe you test it yourself, or you get someone else to test it. And then finally you try and get some feedback from that test, and try and understand what went wrong and why it went wrong. And hopefully you can sort of feed those ideas back into your prototype, and sort of create the next evolution of the prototype, which you can follow and just iterate as many times as you feel you need to. So why prototype? Very quickly, we've already said, it saves you a lot of time. You know, you don't end up writing stuff, writing production code for stuff that people don't want. You can also have like a really good idea of what features people do want or what you want out of it, like much better than just sort of hypothetically thinking about it. And thirdly, you get to create a usable product, which is really important because that's what you want people to do, is use your product, right? And the sort of main goal of prototyping, I would say, is to reduce the cognitive load. So I mean, basically demanding less of your user's brain to parse your interface, and so they can spend more of it making music, because after all, we're making a musical instrument and not a spreadsheet. And I guess it's like, you know, you've got a bit of an obligation and a responsibility to people, you know, like they're using your software in the heat of creativity. They're creating culture, they're creating music, and you can't really let them down. You've got to make your interface as natural as possible, I guess. And it's even more important on mobile because we've got smaller screens to deal with and big fingers to interact with. So and a lot of music software is moving more mobile, as we've seen this year. So what to prototype? Well, if it's quite a simple app or plugin, you can prototype the whole thing. Or if it's a bit more complicated, or if it's you've already built something and you want to add new features to it, something that's already released, you can prototype just a bit of it. And sort of really importantly, you don't need to prototype every last detail of your app. You can prototype, you know, you just prototype the things that are core to the experience. So you don't need to do the about page and stuff like, you know, for instance. Anyway, so how to prototype? The first rule of prototyping is to cheat as much as possible. Cut as many corners as you can, like use screenshots, steal things, like steal bits of UI from other apps and stuff like that. Just whatever you need. The whole point of prototyping is to get a good answer for what your users need as quickly as possible. It's not to write a beautiful piece of code. It's not to you know, do a pixel perfect interface. So yeah, that's really important. Prototypes can be very lo-fi. I think maybe this is going to disappoint you because it's not like lots of code and stuff, but like I would say that the sort of best and fastest way of prototyping initially is by drawing by hand, which I'll explain a bit further. And once you've sort of like got where you want to be with the hand drawings, you can take it to the next level of fidelity, which is drawing on the computer or digital illustrations. And then thirdly, interactive prototypes. I guess this is like the highest level of prototype. So we can talk about hand drawing. Now, a lot of people say they can't draw. I can't draw. You'll see in a minute. And the thing to remember with it is that you're totally free to draw whatever you want. When you try and draw on a computer or with code, it's just covered in constraints. If you want to draw like a rounded triangle, try finding the rounded triangle tool in Illustrator. It's not there. You can just draw it as fast as you can Google how to do it. So we're going to do a little example project, which is a distortion plugin. So for this distortion plugin, I know I want a gain control, volume control, tone control, and a mode to switch between analog and digital distortion, let's say. And I don't know what I want it to look like, so I'm just going to draw the most basic thing I can possibly think of. Slider for each control, and like a switch for the mode. But I think it takes up too much space, so maybe I can use knobs to condense it. And it's quite nice, but it's a bit boring, so maybe I can offset the controls or something like that. But that's a little bit too sort of messy, maybe. So maybe I put it in a line. And so what's happening here, I've gone through like 5 steps of this sort of prototyping loop, but like a very tight one where I'm just having a discussion with myself. So yeah, basically maybe it's starting to look like a stomp box, so maybe you know, draw a stomp box, or maybe I need to put a VU meter in it to show the levels or something, but maybe it needs a bit more character, so maybe I can add some drawings or something. Maybe that's too much character, so just do one bone. Or maybe I can be symbolic about it. But the problems the problem that I've got with this interface now, I'm thinking, is I want some way to sort of visually represent the distortion rather than just the sort of sonic effect. Obviously, it's all about the sound, but maybe it would be nice to be able to sort of see what's going on as well. So maybe I could do, just the transfer function inside the thing. But I think this is maybe too technical. So how about a sort of a version where you have a gain control and there's a squiggle that goes around it and it gets sort of more agitated and distorted as you get to the higher gain levels. So I like that. And also I came up with this one, which is basically just like an oscilloscope, so you can just see the wave getting distorted. And maybe there's this like XY control that you can control the drive and the tone of. So this is like 5 minutes of drawing on one piece of paper. If you had more pieces of paper and more time, you could probably get to a much better situation. But for now, we'll go with these two designs. And now I'm going to show you how you mock those up in a sort of slightly higher fidelity thing on the computer. So I've done all this artwork in Keynote. Keynote's a great tool for drawing sort of wireframey sort of stuff. But yeah, it's as powerful as you could possibly need for most prototyping purposes. So we're going to do this version. So first of all, I like to take a screenshot of a window in the Finder, cover up the title bar, okay, I've skipped a few slides. Okay, put a title, 3 circles for the knobs, some ticks, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and you can see, and also in Keynote, it's got all these sort of garish drop shadows you can apply to stuff, which I love. So that's that one, and then this one, I'm gonna fast forward through it. Okay, yeah, so I've done the same sort of techniques, just rounded rectangles and lines and stuff like that. It's really simple. So I want for this picture here, for there to be an oscilloscope sort of thing. So I go to Google Images, type oscilloscope, and I see this picture, I quite like it. So I tint it just using the sliders in Keynote, or just whatever you're using, it doesn't matter. And then whack it into the design. So now, really important, we talked a little bit about testing, but now I want to sort of say a really important thing about testing things when you get to this level of fidelity is to try and make it look real. So like clearly these prototypes aren't doing anything, they're just bloody drawings. But if you take a screenshot of Ableton and stick your app on top of it, it sort of gives you like an idea of what it will look like in situ, and it helps you sort of pretend that it's real. And likewise, if you're doing an iPhone app or an iPad app or whatever, airdrop it to your iPad, open it up in Photos, and just look at it there. Because if you look at a window on a screen with an iPad template, it's sort of useless in terms of trying to believe it. I really, really recommend this. And you can, yeah, unfortunately, I've got videos of playing, with this stuff, but yeah, they're not going to play. So yeah, play with it, try and forget yourself. You'd be very surprised at how much can actually come out of it. I know it's quite difficult. It's like you just have to pretend you're 5 years old or something. And the most important thing I need to say in this talk is when you're prototyping, when you've got something that you're reasonably happy with, go and show someone else, because sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, and it's really good to have an outside opinion. And the thing with asking for feedback with other people is obviously you need to ask them what they don't like about it and try and find out why. And when you ask why, sometimes they know why, and it's a good reason. Sometimes they don't know why. It's kind of annoying when you have to work that out yourself. Sometimes they think they know why, but it's not true. Like maybe they're getting it, they think it's a different reason than it actually is. And lastly, sometimes they just want to say something for the sake of saying something. So you've got to sort of watch out for that sort of stuff and like be honest with yourself about what, what's really going on, what's wrong, A good thing is to set tasks. So you might ask them to like what they would do to do like a mild saturation setting or like a full-on extreme setting. And yeah, just like get them to act it out basically. But wait, it doesn't even make any sounds. being like audio software prototyping, I would say for now, it doesn't matter, just pretend, like we're already pretending everything else. Or if you're really dissatisfied with that answer, you can secretly make sounds. So this was supposed to be a video of me turning a knob with one hand and like interacting with it on the other hand. So you can do this sort of like under the table / behind the curtain sort of interaction stuff. So if you have like a DSP prototype and a UI prototype. So I take my Deathstortion and show it to my friend Fred, and I tell him, can you do these things? And he's like, oh yeah, where do I turn up the drive? I don't understand. So he didn't understand this whole XY thing, and he didn't know why. But I've got a feeling it's because everything else on the screen that you can interact with, the mode and the output, they're red. And this thing doesn't have any red in it. So maybe to make it clearer, we can do a little dot on the top. And when he understood it, the concept, I was like, well, he wasn't sure about the tone, like what it actually meant. So just putting a few things on the graph, saying low and high, seemed to really help. So yeah, he's pretty happy with this. So I think we're ready to take it to the next level of fidelity. By the way, he didn't like the other design, full stop, and yeah, we just canned it. So simple interactive prototypes. This is like I guess the highest level of fidelity. Now, this is the way that I do it. It might not be the way you want to do it. I use C++ because I have to, because it's like the only thing I really know. And for this stuff, I'm using something called Open Frameworks, which is a sort of creative coding toolkit. It's very handy. So you do need to basically try and spend as little time programming as possible and hack it together as quickly as possible, because as I was saying, the aim isn't to create a perfect piece of code. It's just to like see the effect. Like think of magicians, you know, it's all about the effect. So first I need to chop this up. Like first thing I'll do is take the window off, copy that the mode switch, and then I switch the old mode switch back. So when I superimpose one over the other, it looks like it's switched. Then I copy the little tick out of the output. It's kind of hard to see probably, but then that's the only thing you need to rotate in your UI to see if to see it rotating. And then I need to get that little dot out. So I've got all of those. I also need to clear out the stuff in the oscilloscope because we're going to draw it for real. And then turn those all into PNGs. And then here's the code. Now I'm not going to go through every line of code. It's just to illustrate roughly how long it is. There's like, 30 lines of setup code or 25 or whatever. This is all the drawing code. It's like, it's drawing some pictures and it's drawing some lines. It's very, very simple. And then this is all the interaction code. So there's no UI widgets, there's no components and stuff. Maybe that's not a good way to do it, but it's a good way for me to do it, because what it means is you get full control over what happens when the user clicks on something. You can dictate, maybe a button might have sort of like an internal slider or some sort of wacky thing like that. You can really sort of get into the nuts and bolts of the interaction through this. And I know I've been saying, oh, don't waste any time, writing like extraneous code and making it perfect, but like it's worth spending a bit of time on like messing with the whole sort of interaction stuff like this. So making sound in your prototype. If you have to use C++, that's what I do because I have to, because I don't really know any other way of doing it. But feel free to plug it in with OSC or MIDI if your prototype's in Max or something like that. Or if you're using Faust, maybe you can just stick it straight in. And again, depending on the level of fidelity you're going for, you can still just fake it. So this was a video of the prototype acting in real time, whatever. And I showed it to my friend Fred, and he seemed to really like it, but he had two comments. Like the first thing he had a problem with was that every time he turned the drive up, he had to turn the output down, and it was almost like they were inversely proportional. So I thought maybe we could just do away with the output knob, because it's it's sort of so linked to the drive. And the other thing, he said, it's called Deathstortion. Could you just make it look a little bit more evil? So here we are. Just like a side note as well, the skull and crossbones, they're emojis like built into the Mac or whatever. They're really, really useful. If you need like a quick drawing of something, open an emoji and like make the font size really big. So it's a good thing to do. And then, yeah, so that was it. I just want to show we went from a crappy drawing to a picture of something that looks like an app, but it's like, you know, it takes 5 minutes. To a fully fledged prototype that you can actually try out and find out whether it's good. And we're sort of ready to take it to production code. So that finishes that stuff. Very quickly, tools I want to talk about. Tools for drawing. I use this one called Sketch, I really like. There's Keynote, which I've done this in. And there's also just like loads and loads of other ones. And the point I'm trying to make is like, I don't really care what you use. The thing is to try and use something very simple and not to get too bogged down in the tools. Just go for what works and don't spend loads of time trying to find that rounded triangle button. And then tools for interactive prototypes. I used open frameworks. There's still loads and loads more. Again, go with what you know or what's simple. Don't be too fussed about sort of cutting corners and having memory leaks and stuff. Just go for it. And I wanted to show this really cool video of this thing that I made called CPP Sketch, which is a live coding C++ environment that works with open frameworks and other things. And it means you can basically write C++ as you go. You don't have to recompile. It recompiles the one class you're working on in the background. And it's also multi-threaded, so you can do sound at the same time. I don't know if many people have used it apart from me, so hit me up if you get stuck with it. Basically, I'm using this now, and I can't go back to normal programming. It's so amazing. Yeah, and that's it. Thanks. Thank you.